Fell apart, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Scripture lesson we'll be looking at this morning is from the Old Testament book of Micah. Micah chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Micah says, "Marshal your troops, O city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be their peace." The 8th century BC in Israel was unfortunately a fairly typical time, it seemed, for the people of Israel. It was another one of those times, as the cycle seemed to constantly run through, of relative peace and prosperity, but at the same time a period of spiritual and moral bankruptcy. It's a time when Micah comes to warn the people against the impending destruction that's going to flood over them from the Assyrians. But it's not going to be a destruction that happens because of a weak central government, or because of a weak military, or because of bad policies or poor planning or flawed foreign policy. It's just very simply going to be a destruction that comes as a judgment by God. It's going to be a judgment against the nation, against the political leaders, against the spiritual leaders, those who have made it their business to basically strip the poor of their money, of their possessions, those who have made it their business to take advantage of the weak, to oppress the most needy among them, all at the same time while going through the motions of being a very religious people, but a people who have, in fact, turned their backs on God and are not walking in his ways and not living according to his word. But in the midst of all of this bad news side of the scene, God speaks through Micah with this amazing look forward of the day that's going to come. A look some 700 years into the future, when the Messiah Redeemer will be born in Bethlehem, when he will arrive on the scene. This is a text that's used a lot during Advent season, but it's more than just a convenient passage for Advent. It actually is an oasis, in a sense, in a desert of condemnation and judgment. It's a breath of fresh air that comes at a time when good news is needed. It's a proclamation that is really used to build that sense of anticipation that we've come to associate with the whole Advent season as we look forward to the great excitement of Christmas, the great excitement of celebrating the coming of our Lord. I hope you're looking forward to Christmas. Are you too old to have that sense of anticipation? Are you too sophisticated to have the thrill of looking forward to Christmas? I mean, make yourself 10 years old again, for crying out loud. Now that's when Christmas was Christmas. Our parents and our family of 4 kids, our parents didn't spoil us with a lot of things, but they did make Christmas very special. And it was a lot of fun. And the hardest thing in the world for a 10-year-old kid to do was to make himself go to sleep on Christmas Eve. It just couldn't be done. It wouldn't happen. that childhood anticipation, that childhood looking forward, that childhood excitement of what the season is about. But you know, it carries over when we become parents then of children, as those of you who are parents know. Because now the excitement is still there, but it's just in a different vein. The anticipation is not so much for what I'm going to get on Christmas morning. The anticipation is the fact of having the kids back home. You know, we're looking forward. We are anticipating. Joyce and I are literally counting the days. I think it's 12 days now until Jiff will be arriving back home from her college in England and be here with us over the holidays. And we're hoping and praying with great anticipation that maybe Julianne and her new husband will get to come up from Mexico. We're looking forward to Christmas. It's that excitement that just goes with it. And of course, I'm smart enough to know that students have a vested interest in looking forward to Christmas. All for different reasons, though, isn't it? It's what's behind, you know. A few weeks of reprieve. The exams are over. The papers are over. The pressure is over. We can breathe. We can relax. We can enjoy the season. And believe it or not, even crusty old professors still get excited about Christmas. They may look all stoic and maybe even Scrooge-like on the outside, but inside, they're all 10-year-old kids too, looking forward to the break and to the change, the transition of things to come. Micah is pointing in this passage with anticipation to the good things that are going to come, to the one who is going to come. And then really he makes in these 5 verses, he makes several statements, several observations about this one who is going to come. And I'm just going to touch on 4 of them and just highlight 4 of them and put them up here on the screen for you just so you can see them in front of you. 4 very simple observations. But they're 4 observations that also lead to 4 very significant and relevant questions that just naturally come upon us. The first thing we notice that we're highlighting here that Micah talks about is the fact that when he comes from eternity. Verse 2 says his origins are from old, from ancient times, or as some of the translations put it, from days of eternity. This ruler over Israel who is going to come arises from no earthly origin. It's not just a human event that's taking place. He's talking about a lot more than just some kind of an ancient stoic family lineage that's something to be proud of. But rather he is talking about the one whose existence is actually eternal. He's talking about the one who has no beginning and no end. The one who always has been and always will be. Now, I don't know about you, but that boggles my feeble little mind. In fact, thinking about eternity is one of those things that gives me a headache if I try to think about it very long. Because it's just beyond our comprehension. Yes, there's that sense in which I can understand that in theory, this stand could go on to exist forever, in theory, because it's here. I can see it. It could go on. You know, everything else in Jackson may be gone, but this one's still going to be here. But what really makes it difficult is to take eternity back the other way and to talk about someone who has always been in that whole big scale of things. In fact, it is interesting to me because I can remember being back as a child and growing up in the church and all of that and always hearing about Jesus and the love of God and forgiveness and so forth. But the first real deep theological, philosophical kind of concept I remember ever being gripped by is the concept of the eternal. And even as a little kid, it bothered me. Actually, it terrified me. Because it was something so beyond anything I knew. It was so beyond all of the boundaries and the limitations and the comfort zones that were just my world. I mean, the concept of the eternal, I didn't even think my older brother, who was in the 4th grade, could understand this. And had some questions about it, whether my parents even did. It was actually a terrifying concept. How is it that this one can come from eternity? And what does that mean? We can't fully comprehend it. We can't get our heads around it. It's just too big. But then it doesn't get any better when I watch things like the History Channel, when they're doing this series on the universe. If you've seen any of that, and they had one here just within the last week or two, where the theme of it was the speed of light. And then it gets into this whole thing of the size of the universe. And so I'm 10 years old again with this headache coming back again as I'm trying to watch this thing. But talking about the incomprehensible size of the universe. Yeah, they were talking about the outer limits, as the scientists think they understand them, 13 billion light years away. Who can understand that? I mean, that's like the government throwing away trillions of dollars and handing them out. Who can understand that? Yeah. But I said it, and I watched this the other night, and lo and behold, they were really messing with my mind, because then they took it a step further in a way that I had never stopped to think about. And they were talking about the fact, not only do they think the universe is out there 13 billion light years away, but they said, actually, that may only be a drop in the bucket. That's just as far as we can see at this point. Anything beyond that may very well be there, but we just can't detect the light from that because it's so far. And so they were saying, theoretically, if we could take our fancy little instruments, our telescopes and everything, and go out 13 billion light years away to what we perceive as the outer edge, and look out from there, lo and behold, we might be able to see another 13 billion years worth of galaxies and so forth, and get to the edge of that one, and there's a whole nother one. And so it's this idea, as if I don't have trouble enough comprehending a universe that's 13 billion light years out to the edge. Now they're telling me that may be nothing. That may be only the beginning of something that has no limit to it that we can in any way comprehend. And somehow, as I sit and watch those kinds of things and think those kinds of thoughts, that I know those are child's play to people like Blake Moore and Urey. I mean, they had this stuff figured out when they were in kindergarten, but they're philosophers and theologians. But for me, I sit and hear those things and try to contemplate that. And the question then just comes crashing in on me, even as I read Micah. How big is your God? How big is your God? How big is your concept of God? About the time I think I might have him in my pocket, or about the time I think I might be facing something that I just don't know if he can really pull through on this, I stop and think about the fact that he is the one who comes from eternity. But then he gets very up close and personal, and he comes at the appointed time. Verse 3 says, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth. Micah's overall theme of judgment now and blessing later is what pretty much seems to run through it. But the blessing he's talking about is something that's not going to happen right now. He talks about just the fact is just as childbirth is something that we anticipate, but it has to go through its stages of development, so it is with this. So it will be with the coming of the Redeemer. Israel will be abandoned until God's timing is fulfilled. Good news and bad news. It's a bittersweet message. Yes, he's coming, but no, not right now. In fact, it's not going to be for a long time yet. Simple practical truth that Micah is wanting his generation to understand is that very same thing that we all know from our own experience. God's timing isn't always our timing. In fact, God's timing seems to rarely be our timing. And we just know that from experience. Just when we think we have the when and the where and the how all figured out, we discover that no, we don't. Because God sees from that perspective of eternity. And He's the one who knows the when, the where, and the how. Because His vision is perfect and ours is blurred. But when He comes, He not only comes from eternity, but He comes into our lives just at the right time, right when we need Him most. He comes as the great shepherd. He will stand and shepherd His flock. Stands to protect His own in strength and in majesty. In His strength, of course, we know it's not a military strength. It's not about armaments and horses and chariots, but He's talking about the strength of the Lord. He stands to protect His own from the assaults of Satan. He stands in majesty as this great shepherd. Not in the authority of some earthly ruler, not some earthly king, but in the majesty of the name of the Lord Himself. He shepherds His people with that ultimate authority. And then Micah goes on to say that because He shepherds in that way, in strength and majesty, His people live securely. Security is a pretty good thing to have, isn't it? Pretty basic need. One of the basic needs. But again, just life experience. We sometimes have trouble really trusting God with our security, don't we? Things happen that we don't understand. We want God to respond in a timing that we don't understand. And we feel like somehow we just can't quite give Him control. Somehow we want to, and at times we think we do, but still we keep a hand firmly planted on the wheel to fool ourselves into thinking that, well, we still can kind of control what God is doing. Read an interesting report from a pilot after he had crash-landed his small airplane onto a runway. Now, this claims to be true, that these are supposed to be the actual words. And we know it's true because I read it on the internet. But according to this very reliable source, the internet, these are his words that he wrote after the incident. After catastrophic engine failure, I landed long. As I had no power, the landing gear failed to deploy and no braking was available. I bounced over the stone wall at the end of the runway, struck the trailer of a truck on the perimeter road, crashed through the guardrail, grazed off a large pine tree, ran over a tractor parked in the adjacent field, and hit another tree. And then his last sentence, then I lost control of the plane. That's the illusion of thinking we still have control when everything has already gone wrong. But then it does kind of get even worse because there are times when we actually do have things in some degree of control, but we have such a tendency to mess them up rather than trusting Him. Another pilot airplane story, and this one I actually know is true because it happened in the town where I was living. Pilot comes in to land his small airplane at the local airport, comes in and makes a wheels-up belly landing. Goes skidding down the runway, sparks are flying everywhere, bits are coming off the plane. And to the shock of everyone on the ground, they're witnessing this because he had not radioed ahead that he had an emergency. And so the ground crew weren't prepared in any way for him. So they start scrambling when they see this going on, go rushing out to the airplane. Fortunately, the pilot is unhurt. He's just kind of dazed, but he comes kind of staggering out of the plane and getting himself out. And only to discover that he's the only one who's more confused than all of them about what's happened. Because as he stands there and looks at his plane, he suddenly has the horrifying, humiliating realization that he has to acknowledge. He landed belly down simply because he forgot to put his wheels down. He forgot he was flying a plane that had retractable gear. He thought he was in control till he hit the ground. And again, I have to ask myself, Lord, how trustworthy do I really think you are? Do I still insist on claiming that I'm in control, that I have it under control? Protect me from myself when I think I do have it under control. And the Lord's done that a lot for me. He's protected me so many times from my own stupidity, from my own foolishness, from my own sense of control. And lastly, he comes to be our peace. Micah says he will be their peace. Interesting that he doesn't say he comes to bring peace. As we often hear at the Christmas season, people talking about the message being that Christ came to bring peace to the world. This baby came to bring peace. But Micah says he will be their peace. The peace isn't some external thing that this Messiah comes to hand to the world. He is the peace. He didn't come into the world like some kind of an ambassador from a foreign government with a new peace plan to help resolve things and make it all better. He didn't come as the messenger of peace. Micah says he comes as the source of peace because he is the peace. And that's really the bottom line of it all. Because if, in fact, he is the one who comes from all eternity, and if, in fact, he is the one who comes at just the right time, and if, in fact, he is the one who comes as that great shepherd in majesty and strength and security, if all of that's true, then we can't help but discover he is our peace. Because if all of that's in place, there's no reason not to be at peace. What were the words of Jesus to his disciples just hours before his betrayal and crucifixion? Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. So what does the coming of this Messiah Redeemer here in this Advent season mean to a community like WBS? What does it mean to celebrate Advent and look forward to Christmas at the end of a busy, pressure-packed semester? Are the promises merely cliches? And are the questions they evoke merely rhetorical? Or is this reality? Is this the real world? See, the question, how big is your God, is answered simply in the promise, he comes from eternity. The answer to the question, how punctual is your God, is answered by the promise that he comes at just the right time. The answer to the question, how trustworthy is your God, is answered in the promise that he comes as our great shepherd. And the answer to the question, how peace-giving is your God, comes in the promise that he comes to be our peace. And that's my prayer for all of us today, that we will take time in this busy season, in these closing days of semester and all of the run-up, we'll take the time to really take in, to absorb, and to bow before the majesty of the one who has come. Help us, Lord, to know what it is to truly adore you. Let's pray.